my role here today is to act as chair. I suggested the panel because I really felt that filmmakers need a bit of help knowing exactly what it is that funders want from them. I think it's very difficult for us to know what makes a difference between a standout proposal and one that ends up in the bin, because we generally only ever see our own proposals, so we've got no basis for comparison. So I'm here to represent all of you. If we could have slide 1 of my PowerPoint up, that's great. I'm here to represent all of you and hopefully ask the difficult questions that you might like to ask. I'm going to ask all the panel to introduce themselves. We've got a really great wide spread of different types of funds here. All very lovely, friendly people, I can assure you. So we're going to introduce ourselves, tell you a little bit about what we do. They'll speak to you about what they fund. We'll then have a look at sort of the pros and cons or top tips for proposal writing. And at the end, I shall, for the last 15 minutes or so, throw the floor open to questions. So first, I'll just introduce the panelists and then ask them to talk a bit about themselves. So over right at the end here, we have Tracy Holder, who's a filmmaker, fundraising expert, an independent consultant, a truly excellent fund winner. She's secured over 2 million for her films through fundraising with film funders specifically. Lisa Lazareck from Wellcome Trust. And over here I have Cristina Ljungberg and Leslie Finlay. And I think I shall move now to Leslie and ask him to introduce himself.
Hi, morning everyone. And thanks for coming along. I'm the development executive at Creative Scotland. Creative Scotland's the national funding body in Scotland specifically. And we cross all the arts, Creative Scotland, but specifically we have a screen production fund, a development fund, and we also support markets and festivals and distribution. So we have a good pot of money, I suppose, and we're very committed to documentary, which is obviously what we're specifically here. And we do development from short films and have a kind of ladder of opportunity taken to longer form into feature docs. But we have a show reel, which I think is probably, if we can cut to that, just to give you a kind of an example of the kind of breadth of subject and filmmakers and films that Scotland's developing, and some in early development and through to release. So if we want to roll that. I suppose there you can see a kind of example of the breadth of projects that we're doing. So a lot of them are Scottish based, but also you can see there's lots of stories that are international, that our filmmakers are going out and finding, really exciting and covering stories. And you can see again that we, in terms of our funding, we get involved at various stages. So the earlier coming to us with an idea, the better we kind of develop from very early stage development all the way through to production. And we also get involved at late stage development. So something like Battle Mountain was almost like a completion. We don't have a completion fund, but we got involved at the end of that project to help get it made. I think that's probably everything from Creative Scotland.
Thank you. I think one of the really interesting things that came out of the breakfast we just had together was Leslie saying that Creative Scotland actively encourage you to give them a call first and actually speak to someone so they can say whether your film fits the sort of thing that they're interested in funding, which I think would be invaluable, because my experience is you might research the funding really well and then spend 3 months working on your application and then it not get anywhere. So it would be really useful to have those conversations first. I think next it would be nice to ask Cristina to introduce herself. Christina's a partner, founding member of Influence Film.
Great, welcome. It's great to see so many people here today. I'm here representing Influence Film Foundation, and I think we're a different kind of fund. You know, we're a small private fund that was started quite recently, about 3 years ago, and we started that British foundation in 2012, and since have added an investment fund and a Swedish foundation as of just a few months ago. In addition to those funding sources, I'd also like to mention that we have an online platform called Influence Film Club, which we use to support our filmmakers. So in addition to supporting the production of new documentaries, we also feel that it's important for us to invest in growing the demand. So we're doing that through inspiring a global network of at-home film clubs, like book groups. So we're actually creating discussion materials for each of the films that we support. In addition to that, we also sponsor a couple awards, one together with the Tribeca Film Festival and the Hot Sun Foundation for a new and upcoming filmmaker in Kenya. As far as what kind of projects we fund, we give about 5 to 10 grants per year, and we try to invest in about 2 films at around 50,000 euros. And because we're a small team, I would say we don't like to read a lot of proposals, actually. So we don't have an open call. We find our projects basically through 2 different sources. They either need to come through our network, or we love to meet filmmakers face-to-face at some of the great meat markets and pitching forums like here at Sheffield tomorrow.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I forgot to mention at the start that if you think of questions along the way, it'd be really great if you tweet them at me, at Polly Perkins, and then I can make sure I represent you adequately. Right, next, it'd be great if Tracy would introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Tracy Holder. As you can probably tell, I'm American from New York, and I am, like probably I'm imagining most of you in the audience, also an independent filmmaker, but I work as a consultant and an independent producer. I'm a frequent person here at Sheffield, also in my capacity as a consultant, an ongoing consultant to an organization in New York called Women Make Movies, a nonprofit distribution company of films by and about women that focuses on North America. And I've brought our catalog of films and information about Women Make Movies if any filmmakers are interested. So I'm really here, and I guess I have had to, like most of you, raise the money for my films. And as I'm sure everyone knows, that's not the easiest thing in the world. I wasn't always gray. You know, it's that process that has done me in. But I have had great success with raising money, as Polly mentioned. And one of the things that I have, I guess, an advantage over most filmmakers is that by working at a place like Women Make Movies, and I've been on lots of funding panels, I've had the benefit of being able to read so many film proposals. And what we were talking about when we were at breakfast this morning is the fact that most filmmakers only see their own proposals, and it's very hard. Funders don't generally make proposals available to you to have a sense of what a successful proposal is. So in a way, you're sort of in the dark. I've had the benefit of being able to read hundreds of proposals, and when you see them stacked up side by side, you really do see what makes a competitive application. Just in the way that when you go to see films, you can see what's a good film. Like I always learn when I go to see a film, like, oh, that's a really interesting structural development or way to weave different narrative threads together. The same is true with proposals. And so out of that, my great good fortune of being able to be on sort of both sides, the filmmaking and the funding side, I've sort of developed an area of expertise in proposal writing. Not a skill I necessarily wanted, but it turns out in this world it's a benefit, it's a good skill to have. And so I know the American funders, and more American funders are starting to look to the international market for films and want to fund like Sundance, like Catapult, and we can talk about specific funds. But films coming out of Europe in particular are, some of the best films, and funders want the best films. So they're competitive. I don't want to, make it sound like there's a floodgate of funding, but knowing how to frame your proposals and how to approach American funders is really key, and I'm sure we can get into that. And tomorrow, there's a panel that, or not a panel, but a workshop that Polly and I are doing together that really will talk about the nuts and bolts and really specifically how to frame your proposals.
Yeah, and that's where we'll invite you to ask specific questions at the end of this. I will ask for questions, but please try to keep them general, rather than talking specifically about your own film. I think the money's on you lot because you've done the sensible thing by coming here. And the only other thing I suggest you do to improve your chances is come to our workshop and talk to these people. So next I'd like to introduce the very wonderful Lisa Lazareck from Wellcome Trust.
Thank you. And thank you for calling the audience intelligent just before I speak, which means they love me more. Thank you very much. My name is Lisa Lazareck. I work at the Wellcome Trust. A show of hands, who's heard of the Wellcome Trust? Wow, I don't need to tell you anything, do I? For those hands that didn't shoot up like rockets, the Wellcome Trust is a biomedical, it's a research funder. Its aim, its vision is really to try and improve animal and human health, and we do that through, oh, the mic's going louder and louder, sorry. We do that through funding. We spend, it's a lot of trust speak, around £750 million a year for biomedical research, looking into the history of medicine, ethics, all sorts. A percentage of what we fund is used for public engagement with science. And where I work is divided into 4 main areas. We work with artists, researchers, science communicators, and also people in this room. I'm looking at a few individuals that I know from successful grant applications, so thanks for coming. But in terms of what we're looking for entertainment-wise, we work in broadcast games and film. That's the title of my team. We have a show reel, but I think what I want to talk about quickly, first of all, is that it's entertainment. So people come to me and they say, oh, so you can fund science education. We can, but I can't touch it. So where I work is strictly about entertainment. My job is to advise about what makes grants competitive, what's of interest to the Wellcome Trust. Biomedical science is a really broad umbrella. A lot of people don't really understand what that means, and we don't define it because we're very open to ideas. We have 5 challenge areas at the Wellcome Trust as a whole, if I can ramble them off on a Monday morning: brain, infectious disease, genetics, the environment and health, aging, but that doesn't mean that's all we'll fund. So you can see here that what we fund is quite broad, anything from a short animation to our first foray into drama with Electricity, Ping Pong, and The Man Whose Mind Exploded both came to DocFest. We also have funded My Beautiful Broken Brain, which was playing on Saturday. I hope some of you got to see that. In terms of what we fund, I'll just briefly say it and then we can move on to tips, etc. But we provide money for development. We provide money for co-production and also for outreach and dissemination. Everything's online, wellcome.ac.uk/broadcast. Wellcome's with 2 L's. Very easily found. And I think I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So I think we've got a really great broad range of funders here who offer quite different funding for quite different projects. I think I'm going to ask Tracy to take over chairing for a moment, okay, and ask some pertinent questions of these fundraisers. Don't be gentle.
Well, I'm guessing that what everybody wants to know is what level of funding, what stages of production that you consider, and what is the best way. Because I think, the thing I want to say to the filmmakers in the audience who are looking for projects is that a proposal is like your introduction to a funder, and what you're trying to do, it seems to me, is to establish confidence and to say, if you fund me, I will deliver to you this spectacular film that I have described to you in this proposal. But a lot of filmmakers, and it was interesting, our conversation earlier, to learn that a lot of filmmakers just go in blind to a funder. Leslie was saying, to my great shock, I would say, that there are filmmakers who call and haven't even looked at the website. And I guess the thing that we should talk about is what does give you confidence when you read a proposal, and what are the things that what are the pitfalls that filmmakers often fall into that you can help suggest that people avoid? So Leslie, since I put you on the spot, do you want to start?
Yeah. I do advise actually reading the guidelines first before you meet and just see what the fund is or what we actually support. I think sort of when you're looking at kind of, I mean, we're very open at Creative Scotland, and we'd like to have a conversation before the full application comes in, so it's very good where we can then have a dialogue and actually, but the most important thing I think is what's the story that actually you have to kind of put across exactly what it is the film that you're going to make, and you have to excite us and give us the reason that or the strategy of why we would support it. Obviously, we're a Scottish-based fund, so there's kind of guidance and criteria there where we're there to support Scottish-based filmmakers first and foremost. So there's the elements, but when it comes down to it, it's about the exciting story, what it is that you're going to tell, and I think it's about being very clear. For us is how you're going to achieve that story, so the vision, what's the style, and then the audience as well. I think sometimes we forget filmmakers, and the story is so personal or so exciting, and that you forget. But what we'd also want to see is that strategy or thinking ahead on who is your audience going to be, what's the strategy to get that. And that's where also the trust comes in of who are your partners, how are you going to get it to market, what film, what sales or what distributor there. I mean, the good thing of the Creative Scotland as well is we do partner with, obviously, like there's BBC Scotland, but we also partner with BBC Storyville, True Stories, but also we can fund with the other agencies, so the BFI, and we co-produce, we have co-produced with the BBC Films, and also the other agencies, so like Northern Ireland Screen, which we did I Am Belfast with Mark Cousins, and the Irish Film Board. In fact, we've just done a production development funding with there. So, there's quite a big wealth of area there that to help get your films financed.
And can you talk about just the stages of production you consider and the levels of funding people can expect?
Well, we can get involved in the very early stages, and we know that it's really difficult to get sometimes other funders involved. So we will support the very early stage filming to get a trailer, some material, as part of the strategy to then go out to the marketplace. So we go from the very initial idea of even before the filming, or like very very little, all the way straight through to production. Most people who know this is kind of. So we have a fund. So we have 3,000 to 50,000 is project development for there. So it really kind of becomes a conversation on what do you need at what stage. So I think if you've no other partners and we are the first in and we're helping, then we're obviously not going to go for the 50,000 or there. It'll probably be about maybe 5 to maybe 15,000, just to really kind of set you on the road to there, and then we want to see that strategy on how you're going to build up your finance plan. I mean, what we would want to see is a good finance plan, even if the partners are not there. Just again, it's part of your strategy. So we'd want to see what the budget is and the finance. A lot of our docs, because of just the nature of docs, is sometimes they don't meet, first day of principal photography, which is kind of normal production fund. So a lot of our development suddenly goes into production without actually knowing it's in production per se. So a lot of the time our documentaries are like fully financed through development. That just naturally then becomes, all right, we've now got the film. And that's it. So it doesn't actually officially go through the production fund. And so I think that's the key. But then other productions do. So when we did I Am Breathing, which was a co-production with Denmark, it had a very solid structure. So it came in straight for production finance. And I think that was, I think we gave 80,000 for that. And again, it was
30. We gave 30.
Right, good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
no, it was a fantastic film. And again, it was like to serve the needs with that. It was, within the production, I think we're very careful on what actually the film needs. So we extended, which was quite unusual for documentaries, always like short editing. And we put an extra money and time for the editing process that we felt was really important. To give it the time and support the filmmakers. So a lot of, again, it's like meeting the needs of the filmmakers, what's really important to the film becomes part of that strategy and how we can support that.
Thank you. And Cristina, I know that you don't have an open call, and so how do you find projects, and if you could give us a sense of how many projects you support and what level, and also if you could just mention Britdoc Circle.
Sure. So at Influence Film Foundation, we fund between 5 and 10 documentaries a year. It's always feature-length films, late-stage production funding, and we do that between 10 and 20,000 euros per film. Through the investment fund, which we launched last year, we're funding about 2 projects a year, but it's super early days, and that's about 50,000 euros per film, again, late-stage production funding. And as I mentioned during the introduction, we are a small private foundation, which hopefully we'll be seeing more and more of on the scene, so hope this can be useful. And as a small organization, we don't have an open call because we just couldn't handle it, 2 people reading hundreds of proposals. So we really depend on 2 separate channels for the projects that we fund. One, again, is the meat markets, for instance, the one that's at Sheffield today and tomorrow. So we primarily go to 3 festivals where we think have a nice representation of the types of projects that we're looking at, and that would be IDFA, Sheffield, and Tribeca. In addition to that, as a small foundation, we really depend on our network. So we love it when co-funders send us projects that they love that they're already funding, and they say, hey, this is a fabulous project. You guys should really be looking at this too. And if we find a project that we're interested from either of those 2 channels, then we actually invite filmmakers to apply. And so we send a short application. We don't ask filmmakers to reinvent the wheel. It's kind of the standard proposals and treatments and budgets. As far as, should I talk a bit about tips or?
Sure.
Or,
yeah. We all want tips.
I would say, I think this thing that came up at breakfast is so important. I heard from everyone how much it's appreciated if filmmakers and producers really take the time to understand who we are. That gives us a certain level of confidence just from the get-go. And I would say that 80% of the time that we sit down, people usually don't know who you are, and I'm always a bit surprised. So understand who we are and what we fund. That's going to save everyone a lot of time if you make sure that we actually fund what you're looking for. I think as funders and filmmakers both, we're stressed. We're stressed for time, pressed for time. We don't want a long, lengthy proposal or application. We really just want for you to send us a short, concise, clean cover letter, again, that shows that you know who we are and what we fund, and tell us quickly, what's the story? Just a couple paragraphs. Nobody wants to read a super long email. And as far as the proposal, we like to talk about a one-liner, a paragraph, and a page. And we think if a filmmaker can't tell you what the film is about in one line, then there's some work that needs to be done. So we're really interested in making sure that the filmmaker understands the story and can communicate that to us cleanly. I'll start with that.
Yeah, no, those are great. Those are really helpful. Before I turn to Lisa, I just want to interject just some things about how I approach film writing proposals and talk about a few American funders, just because it dovetails with what Cristina just said. So as a filmmaker, when I approach a funder, one of the things that I really try to do is not think about, I have a vision, this is my film. I try to think about what is the funder's mission and how can I show the funder that my project aligns perfectly with their mission, right? If you think about it, everyone in this room who's making a film probably has a great idea for a film. And right, we're hearing Cristina's funding between 5 and 7 projects. Catapult in the States, which is an important fund for you guys to know about, funds trailers. They say that that first money is the hardest to get, so they decided their small fund would put up money for first money in, basically, for you to make a trailer, and they're international. It's called the Catapult Film Fund. You might want to look into it. But they, the head of that told me, I think they got 600 applications. They funded 5 in the US, because they're a US-based funder, and 2 internationally. Now, if the competition is that fierce, your job, it seems to me, and my job, is to say to this funder why your film is the perfect fit. And I think Cristina really illuminated that. So looking at what they fund, at what level, and what their mission is, and then framing your proposal in a way that says, I've got just what you need, not this is what I want to make, and this is important to me, and this is why it's important to me. That's very well and good, but from a funding perspective, what you want to show them is why this is the project that they need. And one other tip that I have certain signature phrases that we'll talk about tomorrow in the workshop, but you also want to convey urgency. Because if there are 2 projects, right, what happens on a funding panel, and I'll be curious to hear what my colleagues say, is that you immediately go through everything you get. There are certain films that are just clearly not a good fit, or the proposal isn't well done. Those you just dispatch quickly, right? You're always whittling down. But by the end of the process, you're left with a handful of really superb films that all should be funded, but there's no chance in hell you have the funding to fund them all. And so you're weighing equally good projects against each other, and you're trying to decide which one not to fund. If there's a film that is about something that's timely and urgent and can't wait until next year, that is the film that's going to get funded. If it's a film that is about a subject that could be done at any time, what funders will generally say is, we'll encourage them to come back next year. I will never put forward a proposal that doesn't have a frame that says this film must be made now. I'll figure out an angle why it is urgent and critical and timely, because I know at the end of the, when I'm now, hopefully if I'm at the final round and they're looking at all these really highly competitive projects, being something that has to be funded now really puts you at the top of the pile. So that's a tip that I wanted to share. Okay, so with that, let's ask Lisa what you think makes a good proposal, what level, and also, is Wellcome Trust international, or is it specifically UK?
Okay, so the Wellcome Trust does have an international strategy, but what we're able to fund for broadcast games and film projects are within the UK and the Republic of Ireland. So the topic can be international, that's absolutely fine, but you need to find an audience. So if I stem off of the advice already given, oh gosh, there's so much to say. I think the first thing is, what is the story? That's a fascinating one, because I think people often have topics, and I'm okay with passion, actually. I'm okay with why a film is really important to this person and why the story is so good. I'm okay with that. But I think people are afraid to speak to funders when they're actually not that ready to apply yet. And I actually think it would be better to start having conversations when you've got sort of the overall topic idea, because these application schemes, they are really competitive, and you usually get one shot. Wellcome Trust doesn't accept resubmissions. It's only in exceptional cases that we do that because we get so many applications. And that idea that if you can't say what your film, what your story is about in one line, you're not ready yet. And I think that's really hard for filmmakers to swallow. And I know that from a funding perspective, it is my job to give away money. You would be surprised how hard it is sometimes to give away money. We want to give the best filmmakers a chance of getting something made. But that's where it comes into who's your audience? Who's this film for? Who are you speaking to? Who are your other funders involved? It's not just about an idea. Nobody wants to make a film that nobody sees. So what's the point of asking for money if no one's ever going to see your film? So it's trying to actually get into this framework of grantsmanship. Writing a grant application is an absolute skill. And that's why we have people like Tracie who give workshops. But it's very interesting, this idea that having a conversation early on in your project can really help. I do speak to people at various levels of filmmaking. I'm not a filmmaker, so I can't profess to know anything about the like I know something about the process, but I'm not a filmmaker. But what my job is to ask these questions of, who are you speaking to? Who is this for? Who is your target audience? We have people coming to us with all sorts of grant applications, and we do read hundreds. And it's amazing how many people think that if they put a website, every 16-year-old in the country will visit the website. Probably not. So here comes a tip. Get somebody who is not related to your project to read your application before you submit it. Get a very objective, truthful, kind friend who's willing to read it. Did you answer the questions? I have read applications, and 20 pages later, I still didn't know that it was a short animation. The problem is you don't get a second shot. And I think what's fascinating is if you do have a great story, I think film funders, and correct me if I'm wrong, Leslie and Cristina, I think film funders will try and help you as much as possible to make that film happen.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you need to get in that headspace of business, audience, money. And sometimes filmmakers aren't great at that because they're great at making films and not necessarily great at getting the money. So where's your executive producer? Do you have a mentor? We have projects come to us, and actually it's quite difficult to say to somebody, to talk about their experience, because they probably have great experience. But what I think we're trying to explain is that it's not just about a great idea. It's not just about a great story. It's about how do you get to point B? And I can very briefly say that, for example, our development money, we give around 10 development awards a year. They're up to £10,000. There's no deadline. But the whole point of this scheme is, how do you go from point A to point B? And this is what Leslie said already, what do you need as a filmmaker to get more money or to get a commission? What is it you need? Do you need a taster? Do you have a taster, but actually what you really need is to look at X, Y, and Z? And from the Wellcome Trust point of view, we're able to fund engagement with science. We want science to be part of the cultural conversation. Interestingly, it's not about didactic explanations of what is a genome. We're very happy to ask questions of what does it mean to be human. So when you're applying to Wellcome, for example, and you have a conversation with me or one of my team members, we're all online, you can find us later. But the point is, we would say, what are those questions you want the audience to be engaging with? What are those sort of science-based questions, ethics, history of medicine? What about a vaccine trial in Kenya? How does that affect people in the UK? Because who is your audience? Who are you pitching to? So all of this sort of chemistry, this chemical reaction of audience, money, all of it has to come into the conversation. So I think another tip is really don't be afraid to come and speak to funders if you're not ready to apply. I think that sending 5 pages of text is not the best idea. I think asking people for 10 minutes on the phone is a great idea. I'd much rather speak to somebody if they have sort of basic questions or preliminary questions about the Wellcome Trust over the phone for 10 to 15 minutes. And usually I speak to them again 3 months later, and it makes a huge difference.
Well, I'm clearly going to be moving to the UK soon, because there isn't a chance in hell that anybody from Sundance or the US funders are going to take my call. So it's so comforting to hear that there is, that you're willing to engage in a conversation, because it would make it so much more productive, streamline my time, your time, by doing that. I think in the States, they're just so deluged with applications that it's just not feasible. But for that reason, events like this, where there's the meat market and getting yourself seen and getting on the radar screen of funders and establishing relationships, is really critical. And I think fundraising, like anything, at least in my experience, is about relationships, right? And so being able to make these personal contacts at places like this, at IDFA, in the States. In Canada, the Hot Docs Forum, there are a lot of pitching forums that are really great ways to get on the radar screen. And the other, one thing I wanted to mention is there's a clipboard going around. If you sign up, if you put your email and your name down, I have a list of funders that I will send out, and also a list of different types of ways of funding, whether it's equity, which is becoming a bigger part of the American strategy of funding, these venture capital funds, various grants, what the pros and cons are, a piece that my colleague Dan Kogan from Impact Partners put together. So just want to let people know to sign up for that. In the States, I guess what's different is because it's such a big country and so many people are applying and applying internationally, funders are very clear that they can't have these conversations, and, you try to corner them at a party or something, and they're often just, if they see filmmakers, they run in the other direction. So the only way that, you're engaging with them is largely through your proposal. And I think everything that I've heard from my colleagues, I really concur with, that, the metaphor that I generally use is that of an architect creating a blueprint. Because what you're saying, and I realize there's part of this is a fiction in documentary, because we don't know at the outset, right? We're following a story, we don't necessarily know where it's going to lead. And so creating a comprehensive vision when we don't fully know where our story is going to go is a bit of a challenge. On the other hand, if you think of an architect providing a blueprint that says, okay, there are going to be 3 bathrooms, there'll be a jacuzzi, the walls will be this high, and there'll be a door here, and the windows will be this high, you're saying to someone, I have a vision, I have I have a story, I have characters, and that it is a story. It's not a bunch of statistics about a subject. We're storytellers, and I think the most important thing to think of is I often think as if I were writing a review of a finished film. What did the audience see? And because it's a film, it's a visual medium, you really want your funder to feel that if they went out in the street and they ran into one of the characters in your film, they would recognize them, because you've made them so flesh and blood in the proposal that they've come alive off the page. And I think writing it as a story, and then also showing, as everybody has said, that your way, you're the driver, right? So that you know who the funders are that are going to put this together, in addition to whatever funder you're soliciting. You want to create that confidence that I mentioned at the beginning, and showing that you know who the appropriate funders are. It's not just a random list of funders, because we know all the funders, right? So if I see a proposal and it has a funding list of funders who there's no chance in hell are going to fund this project, then you've already undermined your confidence with the funder by showing that you don't really know who the funders are. And the same as Leslie said about the audience, that you want to show that you're thinking about the film to reach an audience. And so you have to have all of those. It's like skiing. You want the funder to ski down your proposal without hitting any red flags, right? It's smooth sailing, and everything is going towards saying, yes, fund me, fund me. And your job as the proposal writer is to anticipate every kind of obstacle or question that the funder could have and answer it. And tomorrow we'll go into that in more detail, but that's just a basic, overview of how I approach writing proposals. and making them very visual because it's a visual medium.
I just wanted to cut in to ask a little bit about audience, because I'm making a film on quite a challenging subject about human resilience, but we tell that by looking at the way parents recover after a stillbirth. And I just saw it happen, exactly the thing. When I use the word stillbirth, what I see is a wall go down, and people think no one's going to want to watch that. And actually, the audience for this film is enormous and increasing by 7,000 families every day across the world and 17 families a day in the UK. So how do I evidence that to funders? And is it necessary to? And what's the value of things like social media, the amount of followers you've got, how engaged people are with your social media in that? Lisa, maybe first?
Unless someone else wants to jump straight in with that one. It's so tough. I think, again, it's, okay, so everyone's asking for a taster tape now, right? No? Yes, people are nodding. Everybody wants to see what a few minutes look like. And then once they see a few minutes, they want to see 20 minutes. And then once they see 20 minutes, they want to see the whole film, right? Right, yeah. Good times, good times. I think the point is, when you have a difficult subject, it is trying to articulate how that story will unfold. And I think that when you do have difficult subjects that someone can't actually see being told visually, you probably would need something on tape. Mm-hmm. But again, I'm not a commissioner. The Wellcome Trust doesn't supplement commissioners. We don't make their decisions. Everything that we decide upon in terms of our grants are decided by committee members, and those committee members are not commissioners. They understand the landscape, but inevitably, perhaps it's relationships and also having those discussions. If you have an audience in mind and you know that there's a growing audience, for example, your film, what slot does that fit into? Is it a film festival kind of thing? And then if you do have a very particular audience that you're after, then it's about your relationship with the commissioner. It's a difficult one. I'm going to bounce to my colleagues on my left. What do you think?
I think when you say audiences, I think you've identified your audience already. You kind of know, you should be saying these are, who are the people who would want to see this film, and this is there. So I think sometimes when you say about audience, it's like, it doesn't have to be the big international, that you're going to be selling out big cinemas. I think it's actually just saying who would want to see that film, and keeping that in perspective, rather than thinking it's a global audience. It's actually just identifying who is it, and that can be not like a blockbuster. It can be a particular thing, because then your film is then financed and it's made in that way. So it's value, you recognise who that is, and I do think it's really important, and particularly now, is to have the very early on is how you're going to reach that audience, and that can be, and documentaries is fantastic for that, I think, because it, if there's a topic or whatever, there is genuinely something that people can engage with, and at a very early stage, and again, you can take them along with that and build that audience, and to reach beyond the obvious, clear, identified audience, who's probably the families who've gone through this and circumstances, and there is then that ripple effect of how do you then go beyond that immediate niche audience. So I think the fact you've identified already, there you just start to think, how do I reach those people, and then how do I reach beyond that? But you don't have to think, and then again, obviously, the broadcaster is very helpful to have on board if you can get a broadcast. But I think if you identify that this is a festival film, it's going to be in there. Here are the sales or the distributors who deal with this kind of film, or we're going to sell, or self-distribute. If you're clear on what that is and you start to build those strategies in, then, that's something for, potentially can get backing. It doesn't have to be always the same way.
Could I give a quick example, or did you want to?
I was just going to jump in quickly. I would just want to agree with everything that you've said. I don't think it's about how large the audience is, but it's about really being honest about identifying the right audience, and then indicating and communicating how you specifically see that you're going to connect with them and helping us understand that. And I think you're also bringing up another good point, which is, you know, there is a special set of films that really address social questions and have an opportunity to have an impact after. And I think if we see that type of film, we'd really like to know that the filmmaker understands the opportunity to use that film as a tool for social change, and maybe has already done some thinking about bringing on an impact producer and starting to think about what that campaign might look like and being honest about what a budget for something like that could be. And, you know, often filmmakers aren't in a position to really run and pull off any kind of impact campaign. So I think it's even more important to recognize, okay, I'm not the right person to do this, but there are people out there that can help me. And how am I going to identify them and really leverage the film to get to the right audience?
Can I give a quick example, actually? We mentioned I Am Breathing twice now, and it's a beautiful film. It's about a man dying. I have to admit that it took me quite a few weeks to actually sit down and watch it. I thought, I don't really want to watch this over dinner one day. I was so very trepidatious about watching the film. And it's actually very funny and poignant and beautiful, and I don't know why I waited so long. But this idea of pitching this film about a man dying, I think the filmmakers did incredibly well in articulating their vision for the film, getting some backing, getting some initial backing, which they then built upon. And what's interesting is also their links to charities. So they went to the Motor Neuron Disease Association, which really helped them with their campaign. And I don't know if you were in London, they had lots of posters on the tube. They had tons of support from charities. And quite often, because we're the Wellcome Trust and we're interested in medicine, we get a lot of sort of pitches and ideas about disease and how people want to make their own website for something. And I constantly have conversations about, if you're making a film about cancer, where is your audience probably going to go if they have questions about cancer? Are they going to go to your website, or are they going to go to Macmillan or Cancer Care? And then it's this idea, and I guess this is a tip, who can help you get your vision across? Who can support you? Oftentimes medical charities that deal with disease, they probably don't have money for you at the offset. They'll probably want to see the film before they talk about outreach and distribution. But coming on board to funders who are looking to fund film, to say that you have support from Macmillan or what have you, can also be very powerful. And that means that you've actually thought through how your film is going to be reaching people. So something like stillbirth, I know that you've had lots of conversations about and the different charities that deal with that. And I think that's one of the best steps forward that you could do. It's not always an easy task, especially when the topic can be so sensitive. But we have seen success stories happen before.
You know, I just want to add to what you're saying, because one of the things in the States, there has been, in the past many years, a real predisposition towards very strong social issue films that are like actionable films, like the film End of the Line. I don't know if you guys know of that film that was about sustainable fish and all of the species that were dying, and it had this huge, robust campaign to get stores like Tesco to only agree to serve sustainable fish and to get restaurateurs to only serve sustainable fish. And so that's the kind of campaign. And what in the States, that was until very recently the only kind of films, and they're still the most fundable kinds of films, because there are a lot of advocate organizations that realize the power of film to put a human face on like wonkish abstract policy issues, like about climate change or various issues. And that's valuable to people who want to have impact and affect social change. So one of the things I encourage filmmakers to do is to reach out to the kinds of organizations that you were suggesting, Lisa, and to say, I'm making this tool that is valuable to the work you're doing. This will help humanize and make accessible the issue you're working on. And try, if you can, even to get a letter of support saying that if, you know, that this organization will use, that there's a hunger, that there's an audience for this film once it's finished, that they will promote it on their website, that they will use it in various ways. a letter of support like that with your funding application also enhances, right? It demonstrates to these funders that you have been thinking strategically about your audience, about what happens to the film, how it has impact. And so a handful of letters from organizations that are also saying there's a need for this film is really powerful. So that's something I encourage you to do. The other thing in terms of Polly's question about a film about stillbirth is what I didn't hear is what's the story? Who are the characters? How is that going to be told? So you come to me with a concept, it's very hard for me to know how that's going to translate on the screen. And the other day, I ran into Leslie and a bunch of colleagues from Scotland, and one of the young colleagues is an animator, and he told me about a film about cancer. And, you know, I have the same reaction, like, a film about cancer, that's the last film I want to see, life is hard enough. But he was talking about his own experience. His mom had cancer, and he's an animator, and he's making this film about this imaginary cat that he creates in his mind, and it's sort of his escape valve when he can't deal with the cancer. And the cat is hilarious. The cat keeps trying to get him to sing this song called Sleepy Lagoon by Doris Day. And I was weeping with laughter. I played the trailer multiple times, first off, just to be able to understand his Scottish accent. But it was so funny, and I know that funders also, in particular, looking at ways of dealing with difficult issues using humor. We did a workshop at Women Make Movies last week with Lois Vossen, who runs the Independent Lens series in the States, which is one of the two main outlets on public television for documentary films. And she said if filmmakers can bring films with humor that deal with difficult subjects, there's a hunger for that. And I thought, you know, there's lots of films being made about cancer, but here's one that had such a distinctive voice. And I think conveying that, it sounds like I Am Breathing is that same kind of a film, that it really has a vision that it's not what you expect, and that's exactly what. And I think that's always what you're trying to show, is that you're making a film that takes you on a journey, right? It takes you out of your reality. It brings you into a world. And when you're writing a proposal, I want to create a world that you can imagine entering through the story that I'm telling you on the page.
I mean, it sort of seems obvious to me that we would contact partners, try and build relationships with other people looking at the topics we're looking at. I think it's just a sort of basic way of evidencing that you respect your topic and your audience. I wanted to ask a little bit about the story, because we always hear that what funders really want is to hear that you've got a great story, and as documentary filmmakers, we often don't know how that's going to play out. So when you're writing an initial proposal, do you write the story that's your best case scenario, what you really hope's going to happen to your characters?
Well, you know, it is a bit of a fiction. I call it an exercise in getting funding and knowing that it's not the film itself. But so what I do is I try to create what I call context. What are the universal themes? And I often use an inverted triangle as the way I frame my proposals, so that I try to start with the broad, what are the big topics, what are the big thematic subjects, broad brushstrokes of what we're going to deal with. So I'm producing a film for a filmmaker in the US, and it's about this environmental disaster in Indonesia, and that nobody knows about, and then it's about democracy and the role of money in politics, which is a subject, as you may know, is a big subject in the United States. And so at the outset of this proposal, since I'm applying to American funders with a film about Indonesia, I want to make it clear to these funders why this is relevant to an American audience. So fracking is a huge issue in the States, very controversial. We know the natural gas companies are arguing why it's so good, and there are lots of people who are very worried about the environmental impact. So I said at a time where fracking is national headlines, here is a film that will engage this debate. So already I've let them know it's about fracking. They don't know the story. I then go into talking about Indonesia is a new democracy, and the role of money and corporate influence is a subject that is very central to this country at this moment. Well, that also then links to a subject that's very timely and relevant in my own country. So I'm trying to lead the funder to what I feel are the issues that they will care about, and to show why, even though this film is set in another country, it still is relevant to this audience. And I actually say that having the critical distance of looking at this issue from another country, I think will allow people in the States to really see the issues more starkly. I then start to go into the characters that we have and more details about the actual film. And the truth is, we don't know where it's going. But what we do is we create enough of a sense of what the larger themes are, and then say, for example, we could imagine this character. So we have a young 14-year-old girl whose father died because of this environmental disaster, and her mother is now struggling valiantly to support this young woman and her sister. And this young woman had wanted to be a poet, and now she's decided she's going to be an activist. She wants to be a lawyer to be able to champion her people and to ensure they get justice. Well, at a time of enormous Islamophobia, another phobia in our country, having an image of a Muslim country that's tolerant is really important for an American audience. And so we have this young woman who's this firebrand, charismatic young Muslim woman who is outspoken, and we see her in her school. We see her going on her first date, which is something that's inconceivable to an American audience. So we also say here we have these images that will challenge what's seen in the mainstream and show that Muslim society is not monolithic as portrayed in the mainstream society. So we give a lot of suggestions without lying about, since we don't know. It is, but we do give a sense that we really know what we're doing, that we have these characters, even though we're still at a very beginning stage. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, that's great. I'd like the funders to answer as well, if possible. So do you give the best case scenario? That's the question.
Okay. I think with development, there is always a giant pinch of salt. You don't really know what is going to happen. You can do imaginary situations, or say, I would imagine this could happen. I can give you an example of something that was successful with us through development, and I can talk about it because actually it was made into a film. It was After the Wave with Amanda Blue. Is she in the audience? No, she's not. That came to us for development money, and she had access. This was about the anniversary of the typhoon. She actually came to us already with access to these characters that she wanted to film. I think access is really important. If you come to a film fund and you're trying to do an imaginary scenario, but you still don't have access to whether it's the hospital or whatever it is, so that was key. She said, look, I've got this access, I've got a few characters, I've done some filming, I've spent a lot of time building up my relationship with them. This is the film, this is what I think I would like. Best foot forward is really good. What do you want the film to look like? What, as a filmmaker, do you have in your head? Say it. And then we know that watching the progression of development awards, that actually things change, access changes, new characters emerge. And what we like to do at Wellcome is we like to keep in contact with our grant applicants and try to speak to them to get an understanding of how things change. Sometimes things go off without a hitch. You had access, you made the trailer, it just didn't get commissioned. And that's okay too, because development money is about risk-taking. So I think access is very important to get before you come to film funders.
Great. We're going to have to be quite succinct now so that people get a chance to ask questions, but it'd be great to have your take on.
I think just I echo exactly what you're saying. It's like I don't think it's rocket science or there. It's like persuading, and yes, you have to have access and sell the idea. I think for us, it's also, you've got to remember. I mean, we're slightly different because again, we're not a commissioner. we're a funder, so there's different reasons, but we have to put together a case on your behalf. So I think you have to arm us with the information as well of that process. And obviously, a key thing is you have to do some of the groundwork. I don't think you can leave things as questions like, if you give us money, I will go and find that person, or I will do this. You know, take "I will" out. It has to be that you've actually done the groundwork, that you do have access, that you do have characters, that we do see what's going to happen. So there is basically homework that you have to do yourself to really do it. And again, it is taking out, I think it's sort of echoed, the thing is, take out any negatives of anything that you can see that can, any question marks, anything that comes up as a question mark almost, I think you need to kind of take out. And so if you've not got the experience and you're new, then you kind of want to hook up with someone that is experienced, and you know, if that's not your first thing. So I think it's been all of these things, because it's a big leap of faith as well, and we're in the privileged position as, you know, a national funder, that we can back talent and we can back things, and we can take that leap of faith at the early stage, and that's what our job is, to see. So I think that's all.
Great.
So I would just like to say, of course, we want to fund films that are ambitious and far-reaching, so we understand that things change. I think that's, we're very comfortable with that. But that being said, I think we also like to see filmmakers that are doing their homework on the rest of the proposal, including a really clean, well-thought-out budget and timeline, because that really tells us a lot about how in control of the project you are. And of course, we understand that those are somewhat objects of fiction, but we can see that you know how to put those things together. We also like to see filmmakers include themselves in the budget, you know, that you respect yourself enough to actually include your fees. I mean, that makes sense. We're surprised how many people don't. So I would just say, don't forget those other critical items in the proposal outside of the story. They really lend a completely different level of confidence in funding that project.
And just a little sort of aside, as a trade union type of person, is it important to you that filmmakers are budgeting for trade union rates for their crew?
Well, we're a national funder, so we wouldn't support anything that wasn't with the national union rates. So it's a given with us that it has to be the set rates. Yeah, we're not there to people not being paid properly. So.
And it's the same for the Wellcome Trust across all the schemes, whether you're an artist or a science communicator, that your fees need to reflect that. There is sympathy from funders. We do realise that homework, which I like to call development before development money, is unpaid. But for example, the Wellcome Trust doesn't fund retrospective costs. So in order to be competitive, you have to do your homework. But in order to do that, you need money. So we do appreciate the catch-22. But at the same time, I think the realistic, it's just there is limited money out there, even when you have big funders. The only thing I would say as well, from the Wellcome Trust perspective, is we don't fund health campaigns. So if you have ideas of health campaigns, we don't fund them. But we do fund engagement with the science, engagement with the history.
I think we should let people ask some questions. So I've had a few over Twitter. I'm going to read the name out. If you would like to ask the question yourself, please put your hand up and someone will bring you a microphone. So I've got one from Camille. Camille would like to ask her own question. Please wait for a microphone, though.
And we're going to be succinct, right?
And we're going to be succinct, yes.
No, we and then us.
Yes.
I'm curious about funding younger filmmakers and maybe first or second time filmmakers, what the potential is for that, whether that can be a positive thing or it can be a bit of a shortfall for us younger filmmakers.
Well, from a Creative Scotland perspective, we're all for that. So we run Bridging the Gap, which is the documentary short film through SDI. We also recognise that we're kind of building a strategy that we have how to get people from filmmakers from shorts to longer form. So we also do a TV half-hour commission with the broadcasters that we have a partnership. And yes, I mean, in our showreel, you'll see lots of films that are from first-time featured documentary filmmakers. I mean, we've just had 16 Years Till Summer with Lou McLaughlin, and that was from her short that won the Grierson, etc. We funded her for the last 3 years. That she's been making that film, that again, it's evolved, it's changed the story. So that's our job. We're advocates. We're there to develop and support documentary filmmaking talent. So, yeah, bring it on. So you have no problem with us.
The Wellcome Trust doesn't have any particular schemes, so I would recommend going to Creative Scotland or BFI or whatever you think is appropriate for sort of training. We are fine with funding people who haven't made, for example, feature docs before, but again, it's how do you reach the mass audiences? What's your fresh approach? How are you going to reach entertainment-seeking audiences? And if you can convince that, whether it's through a mentor or an exec, that's great. But I think people coming to us with this idea that I want to make a first film, but they have no idea how to get into a film festival, probably unlikely. But we're fine with that.
And in the States, you're in luck because there is a film funder for women film directors called Chicken and Egg Pictures. And they have just changed their funding mandate, and now they're only funding first and second time directors. And with their funding, they give mentorship, and they fund internationally. They just brought all of the funded filmmakers from all over the world together for a week of meetings and talking about career sustainability and audience development. So that's a great one. And then I thought Leslie gave great advice if you're a first-time filmmaker to partner with a very seasoned editor or to get an executive producer who is a legitimator and shows that there are people in the industry who have confidence in you and that you know that you need a strong team.
I would totally agree. We're happy to fund first-time filmmakers, but we want to see that you have an experienced team around you. So again, just like Tracy said, editor, great executive producer, be well advised.
Great. The next Twitter question I got was from Sarah C, and that was, does Creative Scotland fund projects by people who are not from Scotland? And I believe the straightforward answer is yes.
Well, I mean, our base is Scottish-based talent, so if you're not based in Scotland, then you would need to work with a co-producer there. So it's not that you're Scottish, it's that actually you're based in Scotland, so that's our priority. If you were making a documentary that was about a cultural issue in Scotland or a story in Scotland, yes, we can look at that. So again, it would be, why would we get involved? And that would be the culture, probably story. And we might then look at, again, who's the team? Is there elements of some of the heads of the departments, or that could be with the Scottish, like the craft elements, a basis on that. So it is possible, but but our priority is for Scottish-based talent.
Great. And can I add something? Yeah. Not to speak on Creative Scotland's behalf, but for Wellcome Trust, if you're not from the UK or Republic of Ireland, you can still apply for funds, but we also look for a co-producer within the UK or ROI, mostly because if you're trying to reach audiences, you need to know the landscape within the countries that you're reaching. So you would see if you go on our website that we would emphasize that you would need someone within those countries in order to be eligible.
Great. We have a question from Carol, and then I'm going to open it to the floor. Does Carol want to ask her own question? Okay, I can ask it. Thank you. So Carol specifically wanted to ask Lisa about multi-platform projects.
Yes.
That's succinct.
Yes. Anything in particular about
how do you go about it?
Okay.
Please address funding of multi-platform projects and how to go about it.
Well, I am meeting with the crossover projects at Sheffield. We do fund cross-platform. I think we don't get a lot of we haven't funded a lot of projects that are sort of cross-platform in the sense we have funded projects that do very well on one platform and then move on to another. So, for example, Okido. Okido was, still is, if you go into Waterstones, it's a magazine for kids made by a pair, Sophie Dauvois is the main leader on that project, but that's a magazine aimed at sort of primary school children, which did very well as a physical paper magazine, but that is now branched into CBBC for short animation. So we have a lot of, and there's another funding panel that I'm on this afternoon, if you'd like to hear me speak again, but that's talking about cross-platform. So I think from the past, we are open to cross-platform ideas. The most successful projects that have come to us have really excelled on particular platforms rather than the cross-talking, and I give examples of that later this afternoon. I'm not sure if that's helpful.
Great.
She's nodding, yes it is.
So I reckon we've got time for about 2 more questions, so make sure they're good. Yeah, we've got someone at the back.
I would just want to ask the various funders the sort of turnaround times for from when you receive an application, the standard ones, and also if a project has a real urgency, if there's ever any opportunity to sort of fast track it through.
Lisa?
Development, everything's online. Development awards, it's about 6 weeks. This is very quick. Co-production awards is about 2 months. Our large co-production, it's by invite only. Outreach and dissemination, you're looking at about 2 months. We can fast track. You really need a good excuse for it. And that's by exception only. You should talk to people before you apply.
Ours is roughly the same. So for development, it's an eight week. It can be, it's usually a lot faster, but that's our kind of outside. It's 10 weeks. We have for production development, for production. So it's on our website. It would have to be, again, exceptional, like to fast track, and we'd be kind of, so again, it would be talking early, because, I mean, for production, fast tracking, you would have to have so many partners in place, and so to come in, I'd be quite questioning why it's coming in and what's the urgency and how you're going to achieve that. So, but I think sort of within 10 and 8 weeks we can be much faster than that process, but it wouldn't be normal.
We don't have any standard timing since we don't take applications on an open call, but I would say it varies, but I think as a small funder, we're pretty flexible and fast.
Great. Time for one more question.
Do you work with favorite distributors? I'm thinking that basically I am in a situation where I have really, really good access with various institutions, but they work in the classical way. They would commit to filming if there's already a broadcaster assigned. So I've got to do the work, the proposal, the development money, and whatever. So how do I persuade them that things will be shown on TV?
Is that a question directly for me or for? Okay. And sorry, can you just recap that? How do we convince distributors or commissioners?
No, my question is whether any of you funders work with favorite distributors or whether you help with the distribution as well. The situation that I am in is that I do have significant access to various institutions locally, but because they don't know about filmmaking, they don't want to commit unless I can tell them that a mainstream broadcaster is interested. And I'm just wondering, if I come to the Wellcome Trust, for example, with a story that you like, you want to develop, but then I need to persuade them that a broadcaster is interested. Do you work with specific broadcasters?
We don't. We're not supposed to. We're not supplementing commissioners' budgets. We do work with all broadcasters, but we don't like this. Working with, we're a funder, so we give you money, and it's your job to do what you do best, which is to get the commission to speak to the broadcasters and distributors. I think you can use Wellcome Trust interest and conversation to leverage other conversations. So for example, if you've had some money, I will say that at the moment the BBC won't accept funds from the Wellcome Trust for production. So you can come to us for development money for something that you'd like to pitch to the BBC, but at the moment that's the bottom line. But I think working with, that's a different kind of relationship. We would support the making of the film. It's your job to get all the contracts ready, even with access. We would expect that professionalism at your end.
Exactly the same. It would be your job. I mean, we would have conversations with them, but we would expect you to get the commission from there. We can work happily. We work happily with the BBC, with STV, ITV, etc. But we'd see it as your job to secure that commission, and obviously as part of your financing and where the audience is, that's a big plus if you have a broadcaster on board, because then we know it's going to be seen by an audience and it'll have theatrical potential.
And here you are at Sheffield, there are all the broadcasters in the world here, and so meeting with them and getting a letter of interest without necessarily a letter of commitment, because they don't yet know, you can go back to your various organizations and show there's interest, but you can also convince them that unless they allow you to film and to start the process, it's a chicken and egg sort of scenario.
Same.
Ditto.
Great. So it's time to wrap it up now. I think what I would say is the strongest message I've got is come and speak to these people. Debbie and I have funded Still Loved completely outside of the film funding model. We found it really hard to access film funds, as I'm sure all of you have. So go and speak to other filmmakers as well and find out how they're doing it. I think it's all about us communicating with each other and supporting each other to find funding. As we go along, I've been making notes, so this is sort of the overview I've taken, and I hope people on the panel will chip in if they think I'm wrong. So my sort of top tips from this panel are contact the funders early on, before you go into development, you know, at the initial stage when you have the idea. Provide them with a taster of footage ASAP. Do your homework. So do your research on the funders and find out what they fund, and watch the films they've already made, so you get a sense of what they're interested in. Propose your ideal story. Evidence the partnerships you've built and the access you've got. I think that's absolutely key. Show urgency, and give a clear and well-planned budget and timeline. And has anyone got anything to add to those tips?
Bring us good stories. It's exciting. Thank you very much.
And please sign up if you haven't. We'll send you information about funders, and if you can come tomorrow, we'd love to see you there as well.
Thanks very much. Thanks to DocFest for having us.